I would like to bring this public safety meeting to order for September 8, 2011. I am your chairperson for the committee, Dave DiGiacinto. Other members, colleagues on the committee are Eric Evans to my right and Karen Dolan to my left. Also joining me this evening from council is Willie Reynolds, Gordy Maurer, and Bob Donches. Tonight's topics for the meeting are the Dewberry Fire Station and the future site proposal of the EMS facility. I believe there is some history on both these subjects, much of which may predate me as a council person. I know there's been some discussion on relocating EMS from Stepco Boulevard for some time, as well as anecdotally I've heard there's been discussion about the need for the Dewberry Fire Station in the past and in the future. And I'm hoping that, I'm sure we'll have some individuals clarify some of that logic tonight. Just to clarify, we are not voting on anything tonight. There are no votes tonight on any of these topics. There has been a, by tax ordinance, a money, $3/4 mil set aside to support a new EMS building and partial payment for a fire pumper. The firehouse decision can be made by the mayor and the administration. Council does not vote on that matter. How the tax money is used is a matter of council and to be determined and agreed to with the administration. That will not be determined this evening. Okay. There's three major issues surrounding these two topics, and public safety is the number one. That's a primary city service. There's financial implications, and we're going to limit those financial implications to discussions around the building and the fire station tonight. And the last one, whether we think so or not, this is an emotional decision. These types of decisions are emotional, and we just hope everyone that's here tonight does curb their emotions when they speak. The meeting will proceed in this fashion. We're going to lead off with the administration. They will present their proposal. I believe Mayor Callahan will be doing that with help. 5 members of the council have met with the mayor and administration, so I'm going to stave off that comment until later on in the meeting. We'll follow with public comment, and that public comment will have a 5-minute time limit for individual speaking. I'll ask to give your name and address when you speak. The administration, I would like them and also council committee members and council members here tonight to be able to respond and have remarks. And at that time, we will adjourn the meeting. I'm going to ask everyone to gauge their comments appropriately. This is not going to be a debate tonight. We're going to limit our comments to the buildings and the fire station, not to other EMS matters or fire matters. We're here to listen. We will take criticism meetings. We do it all the time in committee and council meetings, but I will not allow it to go to personal attacks. So I just want to make sure everyone's clear on that. So with that, Mr. Mayor, would you like to start off?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to address the Public Safety Committee. We do have a PowerPoint presentation. There's a lot of facts that back up much of the decision-making that's going on here, and we appreciate the opportunity to review them. As you pointed out, there's whether it's EMS or even certain aspects of the fire department, there is a lot of history here. Not only does some of that history predate you and the time that you've been on council, it even predates some of the other members on council as well. This goes back as far back as 2004 and even earlier. So it is important to have the opportunity to talk about how we got to the point that we're at today and how this whole issue has evolved over time. My comments and the comments, we're going to have the Fire Commissioner, George Barkanik, our Director of EMS, Gordon Smith, and our Parks and Public Property Director, Ralph Karp, and myself will be making the presentation this evening, and it will cover 4 basic areas. It will talk about the fire department restructuring, some of the driving forces behind the need to reevaluate our ability to provide fire services throughout the city. We're going to then move on and talk about the history and an update on EMS and the evolution of the expansion and modernization of the EMS facilities and the options that we have pursued over time in that area, as well as to give you an update on where the current proposal for EMS stands out at Illick's Mill. And then finally, we're going to end with a review of what a two-station solution that included the retrofitting of North Central or Dewberry Station to an EMS facility would mean in terms of EMS operations. So this is about public safety, both on the police and the EMS component, and there is an economic component to this as well. And it is an emotional issue, and I think we've got to try to stick to the data and the facts that back up the decisions that we're making here today. Just to again highlight what the point you made, Mr. DiGiacinto, is that the mission of the fire department is to operate the department to ensure the protection of the lives and the property of the residents of the city and the firefighters themselves, but also to try to do this in the most cost-effective and efficient manner, pointing out that the two items that you said really are the crux of the discussion here this evening. We have talked in previous council meetings, and again to touch on the economics that are a part of this decision, is that we have seen a 71% increase, and I will point out that the members of council have a copy of this presentation along with some other backup collateral materials that I will refer to in the course of the presentation. But between 2005 and 2011, the city has seen a 71% increase in the budget of the fire department. That represents 20% of the general fund, so for every $1 of general fund, 20 cents of it goes towards the fire department, and this has seen a rather large increase over the last few years. And I think if nothing else, this shows the administration's very strong commitment to the fire department. I mean, we all know how difficult budgets are, not just in the city of Bethlehem, but for all folks. And so when you see a 71% increase in a particular department's budget, you can say a lot of things about where your priorities are, but to me, if you follow the dollars and follow the budget, that speaks for itself. Some of the investments that we have made in firehouse upgrades since 2007 represent about $500,000. We've had a $1.5 million of improvements or purchases of new vehicles since 2007, and a $300,000 purchase of personal protective equipment for those same firefighters. And I'm going to turn the microphone briefly over to Commissioner Barkanek, who can outline in a little bit more detail what those investments entail.
Thank you. The $500,000 in firehouse upgrades, the Parks and Public Property Department has replaced windows in all the firehouses. We've updated or replaced all the heating units. This year, we were fortunate enough to receive a grant to help us install a diesel extraction exhaust system. This is something the firefighters have been after for 25 years. Having to live with that diesel exhaust, we finally got it, and it's in operation, along with just general repairs, carpets, painting, things like that. The $1.5 million in vehicles, we bought a new engine in 2007 to replace engine 6. 2 years ago, we bought a new 100-foot aerial truck. That was over $700,000. We purchased 3 new vehicles for inspections and the administration. Again, for the $300,000 in personal protective equipment, we were fortunate enough to receive an assistance to firefighter grant, which helped us outfit every firefighter in the department with new coats, pants, boots, gloves, helmet, and we continue to update the equipment as it wears out. We have a program whereby we replace so many every year, so we don't ever get into the situation again where the equipment isn't what it should be. Uh, I have some history on how we got to the decision we want to make. You want to get into that
I
first?
just want to cover some of the economics quickly. And so, that investment that we talked about in terms of bunker gear and equipment, as well as the improvements of the firehouse, is not even represented in that 71% increase that I talked about earlier. So, this administration has shown a real commitment to both the equipment, the technology, and the facilities for the fire department. And we've also seen a real commitment in fairly compensating the firefighters as well. You can see from this slide that the median compensation for a firefighter in 2010 was over $72,000. In 2010, you can see the breakdown of where the ranges of where the firefighter wages fell within the bargaining unit. You can see in the latest contract, which expired last year, in 07 there was a 4%, in 08 there was a 4%, in 09 there was a 5.5% wage increase, and in 2010 a 6% wage increase. So all total, over the course of the life of this contract, they've had a 21% increase in their annual wages, which again is well above the CPI. Particularly in a down economy, these have been some rather healthy wage increases. In fact, if you go back as far as 05, which 06 and 05 had a 5% and a 4% pay increase respectively. So it's hard to question this administration's commitment to fairly compensating the firefighters for the great job that they do. As you can see, when you look at their base wages relative to their other W-2 wages, which represent primarily overtime, that the overtime and other W-2 wages has represented an increasingly large piece of the pie as well. So 82% of the firefighters' wages are their base wages, and about 18% are represented through other wages. If you annualize this year's firefighter wages, you see that the average compensation is $73,500. You can see where the breakdown is relative to the 105 firefighters within the bargaining unit. And finally, when you take the base wages and you couple that with the benefits and the pension contribution and the post-retirement contribution, the uniform expenses, you see the wage and benefit costs to the taxpayer, to the city of Bethlehem, for a firefighter with 5 years of service on an annual basis is just under $100,000 at $97,721. When you look at the average firefighter's wage compensation increase over the life of the last contract, you see that it's increased by $17,500, which represents a little over 32% increase. So in other words, you're taking their base pay coupled with the increases in their overtime, and you can see that the average wage compensation has increased by 32% from 07 to 2010. These are rather compelling economic numbers. A large driver of the increase in those wages over this period of time is the overtime costs. And you can see what has happened to overtime costs. Get out the pointer for the rest of the crowd here. This is, you can see the exponential increase in overtime costs within the department since 2008. That is, and it's being driven by a number of factors, which I'm going to talk about in a second. You can, on the bottom of this scale, you can see what the minimum manning, maximum or mandatory manning requirements were throughout the history of the city going back to 1992. We had an 18-person mandatory manning up till 1995, an 18 to 20 mandatory manning up until 2007. That then increased to a 20-person mandatory manning, and recently, in the last couple of years, a 22-person mandatory manning. This gives you a little bit of a snapshot of some of what we're going to talk about in just a second. And then you can also see the overall staffing complement of the firefighters, which was 110 for a long period of time, and it was then be upped to 111 when we added a fire inspector, and then our current complement of 110. And one thing that's not driving the increase in overtime, as you can see, overtime costs have increased by $324,000 since 2007. And by the end of this year, we are projecting total overtime costs to be over $850,000. One thing that has not been driving overtime costs is the fact that we now have firefighters responding as first responders as a part of our QRS service for EMS calls. That started, when did that start, George?
September of 2010.
September of 2010. So the increases that we're seeing in the overtime costs are not being driven by folks going out on EMS calls. As you can see from this particular chart, that not only are total fires down in the city of Bethlehem over time, again, you can see the mandatory manning at the bottom that corresponds with the number of fires. So the total fires is on the top. That's been on a steady decline, as has total structural fires within the city of Bethlehem over that same period of time. So our mandatory manning has gone up and structural fires have gone down. And so the overtime, again, is not being driven by an increase in total fires or structural fires. Now, the trend that we're seeing in the city of Bethlehem is a trend that is happening nationally. These are data collected from the U.S. Fire Administration as well as the National Fire Incident Reporting System. And this is a trend on residential building fires in the country from 05 to 09, and you can see that nationally there's also been a 6% decrease in fires. And this is driven primarily through better building standards, better codes, smoke detectors, sprinklers, and the like. And just, you know, and our firefighters in the fire department do a great job on fire prevention as well. So all of those efforts, and the good news is that it's paying off. And it's also paying off in a decrease in fire deaths. If you look nationally, the same data collected from the same agency from 05 through 2009 shows a 10% decrease nationally in fire deaths. And that's a very positive thing, and I got to give great credit to fire departments throughout the country, and in particular ours for their efforts. And you also see from this particular chart that an increase in our mandatory manning has not resulted in a subsequent decrease in response times since we went from 20 to 22 in our mandatory staffing levels. What has been driving the increase in our overtime has been a function of two items. It's been the mandatory staffing levels, as I mentioned. You can see the increase in the staffing levels from 06 to 2010, from 18 to 20 up to 22 now. It has not been driven by the number of call-outs to trigger OT. Sometimes if we have to call out additional firefighters to fight a fire as it goes to multiple alarms or they stay after, that can cause OT. But you see that we've actually had a decrease in 09 and 10 in the number of call-outs from 7 to 5. But what has driven it beyond the mandatory staffing levels has been, as I pointed out, a rather large increase in sick leave over that same period of time from 06 to 2010. And you can see what has happened to the OT costs from about $250,000 in 07 up to $821,000 in 2010. So this is kind of a compilation graph of both total fires and structural fires down. Meanwhile, you see a rather, as I said, exponential increase in fire overtime over that same period of time. I'm going to let George go from here.
This slide shows what the proposal is of the fire administration if the Dewberry Avenue Station would be closed. Right now, the Dewberry Avenue Fire Station has one engine with 2 firefighters and 1 squad truck with 2 firefighters. What we would have now under the new proposal is EMS would get Dewberry Fire Station. The Schwader Fire Station would keep the same manning that it has right now. The Memorial Fire Station would keep the same manning it has right now. Lincoln Fire Station would gain a firefighter for the engine. On the engine there would go to 3 firefighters, and the same thing would happen at the Northwest Fire Station on Catasauqua Road. Engine 7 would not be taken out of service permanently. It would be housed at the Lincoln Fire Station, and if we have enough people, if we ever get 2 more people, that we have 22 people working, it would be placed in service and run out of the Lincoln Firehouse.
I guess if we could back up a second and talk a bit about, in fact, well, why don't we, when we get to the map, that would probably be the best time to talk about some of these other issues. But I provided this by way of example, and you can see that this was a newspaper story that was published July 30th of 2011, and it talks about Scranton's plan to lay off 13 police officers along with 8 firefighters. And you know, the issues that I just outlined on some of the economics and the increases that we're seeing is not unique to the city of Bethlehem. These are challenges that cities across the region are faced, not just here at third-class cities with paid fire departments here in Pennsylvania, but throughout the country. And what we're proposing here is rather relative to what has happened in so many other communities, is really relatively mild. We're not saying that firefighters can't come to work and don't have a job. We're saying they have to go to a different station to go to work. That's not the case in Scranton and York and so many other communities that have had wholesale reductions in their overall total complement of firefighters. And you know, as I said, this is just a story from July 30th, and if I did a Google search, I could have given you a whole lot more examples. At this point, one of the, you know, George had talked about, you know, what would happen if we closed North Central, if we closed Dewberry Fire Station, and just to round out the economics, and we'll move on to the operations side of the department, and why the senior fire staff has come upon this plan, is that as we approach these current contract discussions, and looking at the economics that I just presented to the public and the council, it was clear that the mandatory manning component has been a significant driver of these costs. And we're trying to build a department that's going to be sustainable over time, and that the taxpayers of the city of Bethlehem can afford, and not have to take perhaps some of the draconian efforts and measures that other communities have had to do. And so as we approach the discussion around the contract and the elimination or reduction of mandatory manning as a part of those discussions, George, Fire Commissioner, Bob Novotny, the Deputy Commissioner, and his senior staff got together to determine what would be if we're going to ask for something in the course of contract negotiation, well, what's the impact of that reduction going to be on our operations? We've got 5 fire stations now, and because one of the other components of this is we want to try to maintain, which has always been the wish of the union and of the firefighters, and something that the fire administration also believes in, is not having one firefighter on a piece of equipment. Because the reality is, a firefighter showing up at a fire with one single firefighter on a truck isn't going to do a whole lot when they get there. So, if the goal is to continue to keep a minimum of 2 firefighters per apparatus, which is kind of what George was just presenting earlier with what the new plan would look like, and we were going to have a reduction in mandatory manning, that would facilitate or necessitate taking a piece of apparatus out of service when we go below that 22. And so if we were going to do that, how would we do that? And what would be the impacts on the day-to-day operations of the department? And that's really how we got to where we are today in our discussions. And if you before you get to the map, Commissioner, could you speak a bit about, because I don't know that everybody understands mandatory manning, on a typical, and how the vacation relates to, a typical staff, shift, and then how we get to 22 or drop below 22, how that drives overtime.
Can I do a point of order?
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, let the administration finish their presentation, please. Thank you.
We normally start out with 25 firefighters on duty. That's what's scheduled. 4 firefighters are allowed off on vacation each shift. There's birthdays, personal days. Those are days off. And 25, if you take 4 guys off on vacation, that brings us down to 21. So automatically, we have one at 22 mandatory staffing, we have 1 overtime already. Anytime someone takes off sick, we have to replace them, which increases the overtime cost. Before this contract, there was a clause in the contract that said the minimum manning was 20 or 18 with a maximum of 3 overtime. That meant if you hired 3 overtimes, that was all you could hire. And the absolute minimum manning was 18. You would go down to 18 firefighters. In the 80s, before 95, there were times where we worked with as few as 14, 15, and 16 firefighters because there was no absolute minimum manning. So anytime we have sick leave, it's going to generate overtime. And like the mayor said, the overtime just was not sustainable at the cost it was. So earlier this year, I knew that the administration was going to be asking to reduce the mandatory staffing. So on our first senior staff meeting, which includes all assistant chiefs and captains, we brought up the subject of what are we going to do? We had 2 real options. Go back to 1 firefighter on some pieces of apparatus or place a piece of apparatus out of service. No one wanted to go back to 1 firefighter for apparatus. We just don't feel it's safe or efficient. So the next question was, what do we put out of service in? We have 2 ladder trucks. Do we put a ladder truck out of service? We have 2 engines on the south side, but we were talking about putting one of those engines out of service. The consensus was that the engine on Dewberry Avenue, engine 7, was the engine that would be placed out of service. That was through the senior staff. After we looked at this map was generated by a study done for the city in 1995 on fire protection. After you look at this map, these circles represent coverage areas according to the Insurance Services Organization. The Insurance Services Organization is who sets the rates for fire insurance. Each circle represents 1.5 miles from one of our fire stations that we have now. If you notice the dark circle in the middle, that represents the Dewberry Avenue coverage area. Now, the fortunate thing, if we have to take that engine out of service, if you'll notice the circle to the right from the Easton Avenue station, on the left, Catasauqua Road Station, and to the bottom, the Memorial Fire Station, they all overlap and cover most of the area that engine 7, our Dewberry Avenue engine, now covers. The only exception, or the area that would lose coverage, if you could run around that area, is this area right in here. And if you look at this area, it's mostly wooded, cemetery, parks, and if you look at that coverage area, the yellow, which is the Dewberry Avenue Fire Station coverage area, a large majority of that area is open or wooded land. You don't have the population or the housing density that you have in Center City or the South Side. So that's even more fortunate. If we have to take something out of service, that's the engine that makes sense.
And I'd also point out that there are areas right now, even with the 5 stations that we have, this area here, and happens to be where I live, and this much of South Bethlehem, where, which are outside of that 1.5 mile radius today. So as the commissioner pointed out, the only area that would fall outside that 1.5 mile radius, which currently is within it under the 5 station versus the 4 station plan, would be this sliver here. And that's demonstrated by